Hi, and welcome to Suburbia Press Live. My name is William Beam. Are you in the market for web hosting, or have you got a web host and it's not doing exactly what you need? You think you might need to switch? I got to tell you, I've been doing this since 2002. I think I got my first domain and started going through web hosts, and I've switched and I've switched and I've switched. I finally came across one that I've been with for the past few years. I'm very happy. And I wish I'd known then when I was starting off what I know now, and I'm about to share with you about how to evaluate a web host to make sure that it has the resources and services that you need, particularly if you're doing this for business. So, again, this is kind of oriented towards people who are going into probably a home based small business online. And I hope this is helpful for you. So, why don't we go ahead and get started? Today, we're going to talk about 7 factors when choosing a web host. In other words, don't pick a dud. So we get started with the 7 factors. And here's the factors that we're going to be covering today: the reliability and uptime of the web host, their customer service, because there are going to be times when you've got a problem and you need to rely upon their customer service. Do they have offsite backups? And we'll go over some criteria about how to evaluate that. Obviously, what does it cost? And are there additional fees for other services or things that maybe you have an overage of the basic plan that you have? Adding domains is going to be important. You can get a domain from a lot of web hosts, but you may also have a domain from someplace else. And particularly if you're switching, you don't necessarily want to move your domain every time you go to a web host. Are there account limitations? I kind of alluded to that before, and I'll give you some examples of account limitations. And are there add-ons like eCommerce? Do they include email, and do those cost extra fees, or does it cost extra money to use those? You may want them, you may not, because there are going to be third-party places where you can get that, or you may be looking for a solution that has everything in one place. So let's start with the reliability and uptime. Obviously, your business depends upon this, because if you're not up, you're not in business. So you want to start off doing some research about their uptime. And there are a lot of places that are going to tell you that they are up 99.99% of the time. Don't trust that right off the bat, because that does not include scheduled downtime. So if they have to go down for whatever reason and they don't have a backup site, your website is down. So beware of that 99.9% claim. Look for reviews from other people. You might want to go look for a Google search of the web host name that you have, then plus, and then forums. And you'll see people talking about the web host. You might do the same thing with plus and reviews. So that way you can do your research and see what people are saying about the web host that you're considering moving to. And as I said, you want to look for a guarantee. But when I talk about this guarantee, what are they guaranteeing? And what are the terms of that 99.9%? Remember, if they have scheduled downtime, they're not going to count that. And it's probably in the terms and conditions. So you need to read those carefully before you sign up. So what does the guarantee offer? If they miss their guarantee, do you get a refund, a partial refund? Do they do anything for you at all? A guarantee is meaningless if it isn't written in your terms of service what happens if they miss their guarantee. So it's nice to say we have a guarantee, but what is that guarantee? You want to ask them specifically, what guarantee do I get? What remuneration do I get if you fail to meet your uptime guarantee? You want to know where they're located and do they have backup power? The location is important for a number of factors, but what you may want to consider is how close is that location to where the majority of your users are coming from. Also, are they in an area that is prone to have power outages? So maybe in the wintertime, snow knocks out power lines and that gives them problems. Do they have backup power to keep them going? Are they in a tropical area? I'm in Florida, so when we have hurricane season, does that knock out power of a web host, particularly in Miami or along the coastal region of Florida? Do they have problems in other areas that are weather induced or may affect power? And very carefully look at backup power and look at their host infrastructure for redundancy. So if one site goes down, do they have a failover site? Do they have networks that are redundant? So what I mean by that is if they have a data line coming in from AT&T and that goes down, they're out of business unless they have another data line coming from Verizon or T-Mobile or whatever network service they have, do they have redundancy? You want to find out if your primary line goes down, do you have a backup for your network capacity as well? All right, let's talk a little bit about customer service because this is really what, for many people, can make or break a web host. They can have all the other factors set, but if you can't get customer service in a timely manner, or if the customer service isn't great, maybe they're a little curt or they're a bit rude, then this can really be a big factor for whether you want to know if you're going to go to a particular web host. So, when are they available? Some places are available 24 by 7, but they may have a delay in when they will get to you. So, for example, the current web host I'm with is Cloudways, and they can take maybe 10 minutes or so before they get to you. Usually it's been faster for me, but if there's a big issue going on, expect that customer service is going to be delayed. Other web hosts may only be available with customer service during specific business hours, which means if you have a problem outside of those hours, you've got to wait until they come back in. For simple things, that may not be a problem. For an outage or your website is down, that is an enormous problem. So I would recommend looking for something that offers 24 by 7 support. How do you access your customer service? A lot of places will have chat bots. They may access it by filling out a form. Very rarely these days do you get telephone support, but you may be able to pay extra for telephone support in some places. Some people like to write and chat back and forth. Other people want to talk to a person. And I think there are pros and cons to both sides. But what you really want to know is, how do you like to interact with your customer service agents, and do they have what you're looking for? So if you want phone support, even if it costs extra, you want to see if they have that available. If they have chat support, you want to try that out. Most of these chat agents will first try to offer you something to keep you from speaking to somebody. In other words, have you tried this? Or here are some articles that may help with your need. And sometimes those will help you resolve a problem, so you don't really need to talk to anybody. There's nothing wrong with that kind of service. It is still customer service. So I mentioned the response time. How long does it take them to respond to you once you've put something in? WPX is a shared hosting service. They claim that they have a 30-second or less response time. I used to use WPX and I left for other reasons, but this is something that I can confirm. When I went for service at WPX, and it was chat-based service, somebody was there in 30 seconds or less. They kept that guarantee. And is there a response time guarantee? This kind of goes back to your uptime guarantee. Well, if they don't respond in 30 seconds or less, what's the offer of remuneration? If you're waiting there for a few minutes, you know, is the guarantee any good if they don't specify in writing what happens if they fail to meet their guarantee? So definitely take a look at, anytime you see the word guarantee, don't trust it. Look for it in writing to see, do they offer you something in place of that? All right. Check reviews to determine the quality of customer service. We kind of mentioned the same thing with uptime and reliability. Do the same thing. Go to Google and let's say that you put in WPX customer service, if that's who you're considering, plus forums, plus reviews, plus Facebook groups, and see if you can find some discussions about how their customer service is. This is also quite important. Do they have tutorials, a knowledge base, or frequently asked questions? Many times you can get the answer you're looking for in these little sections. Sometimes they're on target. Sometimes they come up and they offer you things that really don't come up with what your specific question or problem is. But the fact that they are there shows that they've probably heard the same questions over and over again, and they've made a document so it's easy for you to follow. In some cases, they'll also have video tutorials. So you may want to check, do they have web articles, or do they have video tutorials, a little bit of both? Do they have a knowledge base where you can search on specific types of problems that they've reported on? Do they have frequently asked questions? All of these are very helpful and important. So please go ahead and check that on any web host you're considering. All right, we're coming down to offsite backups. And there are a couple of ways to do backups. You can find plugins for WordPress that will do backups for you, but having your host do offsite backups can help you out as well when you need to recover. So how frequently do they create offsite backups? I mentioned that I'm on Cloudways. They have a daily offsite backup, and other sites may want something a bit more frequent than that. what I think is probably in most cases a daily offsite backup is pretty good, because that means whatever work you've done, it's annoying if something happens, you break your site and you lose some of the articles that you posted. But at least if you go back one day, you haven't lost your entire site. So keep in mind that frequency. Where do the backups get stored? You do not want your backup stored on your server or in the same place where you may have a problem. So you want the backup stored off site, and that is very particular. Make sure you're looking for an off-site backup, not just a backup. So you want them created on a regular basis, and you want them stored someplace other than your server. Because if your server is down, you can't get to the backup to use that to restore it. So make sure you understand where they are storing the backups. And then, obviously, is important, what's the process to restore a backup? Is there a service where you can push a button, say, yes, I want to restore this? Or do you have to contact customer support and get them to restore it? If so, how long does it take them to get around to restoring it? So these are questions you want to know, because when you're ready to restore your site, you kind of want it done quickly. What is the backup retention period? Basically, this means of the number of backups they create, how long will they keep them? Some places will keep a few days worth of backups, which in the case of mine, where it's only 1 day backup, you may only have 3 backups. Others may keep 7 days backup, and others will keep more. But you want to know how many revisions of your backups do you have that you can use? Because let's say that you find a problem that maybe there was some malware on your site and you want to go back to a state before that was there. If you have backups that go farther enough back, yes, you can just restore and get rid of that malware. Granted, you lose some of the materials that you've created on your site, in that time, but that's an easy way to clean up a problem. So you want to know how often that they have those backups. So what's the retention period? And do they test to make sure that their backups are recoverable? It's one thing to say you have a backup, but are they testing to say, yes, we've made a backup, we've tried a restoration, and we can recover your site? And can you test that as well too? So these are things to keep in mind. It's not enough to say that we have a promise of a backup and you've got so many days. Can you prove that the recovery actually works? And are there on-demand options to create a backup? So they may have an automated 1 backup a day, but let's say that you're getting ready to do a major WordPress upgrade, or you've got a key WordPress plugin that you want to upgrade. It's a good idea and best practice to back up before you make those kind of changes to your website. So you want to know if you can push a button and say, yes, we will create a backup on demand for you. They may limit how many on demand backups you can make, or it may affect your retention. So let's say that they only keep 3 backups. If you do 5 backups in a day, you don't have those previous days' history. So keep in mind, if there's an on demand backup available, that's a good thing. But how does it affect the retention? Do they keep previous days, or are you adding to when you add that on demand backup? All right, let's talk about some costs and fees. And I say this is important, but not the most critical factor. A lot of people like to go for cheap hosting. And in my opinion, that's a big mistake. If you're in business, you want reliability, you want good service, and those things cost money. Doesn't have to be an outrageous fee, but you want to know that you're getting something of value for what you're paying. So you want to look for hidden costs. Are they offering like a teaser rate to get you in? And then you find out, well, it costs so much to set up, or your renewal is going to be at a higher rate than what you paid to get in. And there are people who will kind of shop around. They'll go to cheap services and get the rate for 1 year. And then when the rate is going to jack up the next year, they'll go to the next place that has a cheap offering. Man, that's a lot of work as far as I'm concerned. I would rather find a good, reliable host and then know that my price is stable. I'm not necessarily looking for the teaser rate to get in, because I think those are probably the hobbyists, not really the business people. So you want to review your billing cycle for hosting fees. You want to know, are the prices stable? Are they going up? And when are you going to be billed? Are you billing annually? Or are you billing monthly? Or is there some other period that they're billing on? But you want to know, when is that cost going to come due, to make sure that you've got money in the bank to take care of it. And I mentioned this kind of with a teaser rates. Is the initial fee different than, is the renewal fee different than your initial registration? So I mentioned some places will say first 3 months for a discount, first 12 months for a discount. And a lot of places do this. As I mentioned, I'm with Cloudways. They occasionally run offers that you will get a discount for your first month, your first 3 months. And that kind of gets your foot in the door. And then the price goes up. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. You're getting some value with the discount, so long as you make sure you look at what is the real rate that I will be paying ongoing. So find out if you can take advantage of something that's a bit of a discount for a period of time, but you still know that you want to stay with this host. That's why I'm saying the cost and fees are not necessarily the most critical. So you can get a little extra value sometimes this way, but for the most part, you want to look at that final fee of what they're going to be charging for their hosts. And what is the refund policy, if any? If you're dissatisfied, if they don't meet their guarantees, do they have a refund policy? And also, this is something else I would suggest you do with your Google search is find out, do they actually follow through on their refunds? What are the criteria to meet in order to get a refund? Who does not have a refund? Some places will not give you a refund, particularly if you're doing month to month. But what they will say is that you can keep your service up until the end of your billing period. So you've paid for this. We're not going to go backward and refund you. But if you cancel, you keep on going until the end of your billing period, and then we won't bill you anymore. So that's something to look for as well. What services are additional fees? With Cloudways, they used to partner with Rackspace to have add-on email, which an email account was pretty cheap there. I think it was like $1 per email address. Compared that with going to Google Workspace, which is charging either $5 or $6 for an email address. These things can add up, particularly if you need multiple email addresses for your business. So you may have one for your name at yourbusinessdomain.com, another one for support at this one, another one for sales at this one. So you can have multiple email addresses, and you want to find out, what does it cost to get an email address? Not every web host has email services to go with it. Some do, some don't. I think a discount web service called Hostinger has email available with it. And they're really not good web hosting, but some people get an account there just to use the email service. So something to keep in mind. You may be looking at email services rather than web hosting, but keep in mind that some web hosts will have cheap email hosting rates that you can use that and then host your domain elsewhere. Other services may include e-commerce, and we're going to take a look at that in a moment as well too. But look and see, do they have additional services for a fee? I know with Cloudways, they have a fee for some integrations with Cloudflare, which is a different service as well. Cloudflare has a free service, and I'm using that. But they also have paid services, and then Cloudways will integrate with that for a lower overall price between the two of them. So there are additional fees you can do, and you're looking for the benefit that you get from doing that integration. Are there any maintenance fees in addition to the hosting costs? In other words, you pay whatever your price is per month for hosting, but if you need maintenance from them, for example, the backups, is that a maintenance cost? Does it cost extra, or is it included with your hosting? Look for anything that is not included with the hosting that you may need to rely upon, or just basically to make sure they're not slipping something in there, because this is the way some hosts, particularly the lower end ones, work to try and get some extra revenue. They give you this little teaser in the advertisements how low their rates are, but then you find out it actually costs more to operate. So look for those hidden fees or maintenance fees. All right, let's talk about adding domains. Does the host offer domain registration services? A lot of hosts do. And you can also use other domain registration services like GoDaddy is a popular one. Namecheap is another one that I use. Google has domain services. Cloudways also has a good price on their domain. And I've found that it's probably better every time you want to buy a domain, shop around, see who has the best price for your domain. You can find that maybe sometimes they're all the same. Sometimes you can find a nice discount. Recently, I came across on Namecheap, they had .art domains for 99 cents. And my daughter is an artist. I asked her if she wanted that, and she declined. But the idea is, if there are certain domains that have discounts on time to time, they're not necessarily on every domain service. So you can add I'd say you can get your domain from your host. It's a convenient factor. But there are times when you're going to switch from one host to another. Do you really want your domain stuck at the same host that you just left, and then you end up maybe moving it to another one? I prefer using a domain registrar, but Different strokes for different folks. If you like having your domain purchased from the place where you get your website, that's something to consider. Does the host work with other domain registrars and DNS services? So I mentioned GoDaddy and Namecheap. Those are domain registrars. They also have DNS services. Some web hosts like WPX I mentioned will have DNS services, the domain naming system. Those things are going to be critical for you, but you don't necessarily always have to have them in the same place. And yet, some hosts will want you to host your DNS with them to take advantage of features like their caching service, or if they have a content delivery network like WPX does. If you want to use that, well, you need to have your DNS with them. But the downside is their DNS may not be the fastest one around there, and their CDN may not be the fastest one around there. There are trade offs in performance. So, if you're really looking for performance, you may want to go to Cloudways, which is a large service that has really fast DNS. It's faster than Google's DNS. So that way, when someone searches for your site, they get a response really quick. It goes to your host. We're talking about milliseconds, but all these little delays add up to the speed of your site. So where you host your DNS, yes, you can host obviously with your web host, and maybe you can take advantage of some features, but you also want to know, can they work with your domain being registered and held somewhere else? And can they work with your DNS being held somewhere else? The answer should be yes. If no, to me, that is a big red flag because it also makes me wonder, do you own your own domain if you have to buy it from them and host it with them? Or do they own the domain and they're merely leasing it to you as part of your hosting cost? So these are things to keep in mind. Do you own your own domain? What are the domain transfer options? There are going to be times you want to transfer a domain in. So you're using their hosting, you've decided to go with them, and you need to associate your domain name with the hosting service that you have. And then if you leave, you want to make sure that obviously that you can transfer your domain out. And this really matters most if you buy the domain from them. If you've got your domain registered someplace else like GoDaddy or Namecheap, then you can transfer that domain wherever it's acceptable. They can't hold on to that domain because they don't own it. But if you buy it from them, can you transfer that domain to another hosting service? So that's something you want to know. What is the domain setup process? So this goes back again to web hosting provides you with a host, and they'll probably give you a host name that has a lot of gobbledygook in it. And you need to associate that with your domain. Is it simple and easy to do? Do you need customer support to help you assign that domain? And those are things that you want to know. How do I set up my domain? Another factor to keep in mind is maybe you want to have a domain that you bought that goes specifically to a page on your site. And your web hosting usually lets you set up one domain that goes to your homepage. Well, if you want to have one domain that goes to a specific page on your site, can you do that yourself, or do you need customer service to help you do that? It's not difficult for them to do, but the question is, can they do it, and will they do it, and how long will it take them to do it? So do they offer DNS management tools? And these are going to be important for things like setting up your email service. If you've got email, that's part of your DNS. And then you want to be able to add in your MX records. There are also things for security called SPF, DMARC, and DKIM. So those are things that help you make sure that no one else is spoofing your email, and that's all part of your DNS. So do they offer that service? Again, it really goes back, do you want this as an all-in-one service, or do you want to transfer your domain and your DNS to them? And do they have the tools to do that? It's not a right or wrong answer if you have everything in one place, but you want to make sure that everything you have is mobile, that you can work with tools if you decide to separate things on different hosts and different services. So how did the host domain pricing compare to other vendors? This is simple shopping. But remember what I said, price is not necessarily the most important thing for a business account. Yes, you can find cheaper hosting. You can always find cheaper hosting. But if they don't have the resources and services that you need, you're really going to hate it, and your site is not going to perform very well. And slow sites don't get much traffic, and the traffic they do get gets frustrated if it takes too long to load a page or to load an element of a page. All right, so account limitations, as I said, these can be killers when your business grows. And WP Engine is another host that I use, and they had a lot of account limitations. So let's talk about that. So first off, you want to know what resources you're getting. So find out the provider's resource allocation. You want to know how much CPU you have. Is it one core? Is it a fraction of a core? Do you have two cores or more? How much RAM do you get? How much storage space do you get? WordPress loves RAM, and I'm running on a site that has 4 gigs, or excuse me, I'm running on a server that has 4 gigabytes of RAM. Most shared hosting will not even give you 1 gigabyte of RAM, and they're hesitant to tell you how much you're getting. The plan I had on WPX was more than just the basic plan, and it only got 256 megs of RAM. If you're running a blog, you don't have any other plugins that are doing services like support or email or membership or things like that, then that's probably enough. All you're doing is putting up articles, running a blog. I think you're going to be fine. On my account, they also said I had 2 PHP workers, which each one had 256 megs of RAM. So they were trying to tell me I had like 768 megs of RAM for my site. It doesn't really work out that way because those workers are doing their own thing and you can't take advantage of for other services that you have. But that was still less than what I would get on the basic Cloudways VULTR HF high frequency service that I used. Started off with 1 gigabyte of RAM, which again, for some sites, that's great. For others, it's not enough. But you want to know how much space do you have, how much CPU do you have, and how much RAM. And a lot of shared sites won't tell you anything more than how much disk space you have. There are going to be limitations on your disk space no matter where you go. And you want to know if you go over, does something break or do you automatically get billed for something else? So if you need more resources, you need to know what you have. Can I get more resources and what does it cost to get those resources and how does it happen? So are the resources dedicated or shared? Having used shared hosting like HostGator or Bluehost or WPX or WP Engine, those are shared resources, and I got to tell you, I hate them, at least from a business point of view, because you never really have all the resources. Because if somebody else or something else on the server is consuming more resources, even if it's only for a brief period of time, that means that if you need something that's at the same time, it's not available to you. Now, I will say that the hosting software that people use for shared systems is a lot better than it used to be. But still, you have limited resources. You typically don't know how many resources you have, and they may not be available to you on a consistent basis, which can really crush your site. If you're having a neighbor that's consuming a lot of the resources at the same time that Google comes and crawls your site and it can't get a good response time, well, that affects your overall ranking for your pages and your site, which means that you're going to drop down in rankings. So I really don't recommend shared hosting. What I do recommend, and we'll talk about this, is a virtual private server. And that is where you have dedicated resources. It doesn't have to be a physical box, it can be a virtual box, but the resources that you get are yours to use and yours alone. So you want to check if the hosting provider has bandwidth limitations. So for example, WP Engine is another good option here. You will see that they will let you have maybe 100,000 megabits, per billing period. And if you go over that, then it costs more. So there is a resource limitation on your bandwidth. If you've got a small site that doesn't get much traffic, then you might not hit that. But if you've got a business or you have an article that suddenly goes viral and spikes, you get a lot of traffic. Next thing you know, that costs you money. And if you're not doing that as a business, it costs you money. You made no profit from getting traffic to that page. It's just another expense. So I want to make sure I understand what my bandwidth limitations are, if any, because you want to know that when traffic comes, that's when you really need to serve people, particularly if you got something that goes viral and you can become a big hit. So that's a potential killer for a business. Are there any database limits? This one I found is less common to me, but sometimes they will limit the size of your database or how many tables you can have. So if you add a lot of plugins and they have a large database, WooCommerce can have a lot of stuff in a database, particularly if you're trying to sell something. And you may need to buy another plan or an add-on to handle all of the tables that go into that database. So something to consider if you're going to be working with a plugin or several plugins that add rows and tables to your database, you need to find out, are there limitations that they will accept on their database? Does the host restrict the file types that you can upload? And some hosts do, because they don't want anything executable being loaded on their site, because they don't want any malware on their site. So maybe you can upload text, maybe you can upload images, you might be able to upload a PDF. Some other file types they're not going to accept. They may not even want to accept media types, for video or music, because they're worried that you may be putting out copyrighted material. You need to understand, can you upload that to your site, or does your website have to link to a different host, like YouTube, for example, for video, or Vimeo, perhaps, for video, that will host your media for you? So, in general, I would say if you're doing media, your web host is not the place to do it. Same thing with email or podcasting. Your web host is not the place to do it. You want dedicated hosts for your media, and then you link to them from your website. So use the right tool for the job. Does the host restrict any type of software? And I'm particularly talking about plugins or scripts you can use. There are some hosts that will tell you, we do not allow this plugin on our servers. End of story. They're not going to listen to anything you have to say. And that's because they have had experience with the plugin. It causes problems. And if you're on shared hosting, particularly, it causes problems for other people on that server. So find out what their restrictions are. And this is probably going to be more with shared hosting than with dedicated hosting. Because if you screw up your own dedicated site, they don't care. You're still paying money every month and you're not affecting anybody else. But if you screw something up on shared hosting, it affects other people, and they're just simply not going to let you do that. Also, with scripts, there may be some JavaScript or other PHP scripts that they say, no, we don't like this because it consumes too many resources. It affects other users on the site, and it affects the overall performance. So look for limitations on plugins, software, scripts, and that sort of thing. And finally, can you scale the size of your hosting resources? All right, so you start off with this basic plan and you outgrow it. What does it take to move up? On Cloudways, there's a little slider thing. You can say, okay, I want to move from a 1 gigabyte server to a 2 gigabyte server. Move the slider. It takes a minute or two to rebuild things and add the resources, and you're done. You want to move up to 4 gigabytes or 16 gigabytes, you just move a slider. With shared hosting, some places may give you an option to scale up that way, but most you're probably going to move to another plan. In other words, it's a paid service to add that. Now, don't get me wrong, on Cloudways, when you move that slider, it's also moving you up your price as well, because you're getting more resources, you're paying for more resources. But what you want is the ability to easily move to more resources. And you want to find out what it costs to upgrade and what it costs, or how long it takes and what the process is to do that. All right, we've talked a little bit about add-ons like e-commerce and email. And do you need more than just hosting your website? So ask them or do your research. Do they offer more? And that's just the simple things, like a lot of places are offering more than what their initial offer was. If you look at ConvertKit, which is an email service provider, a few years ago, they started offering e-commerce. So then they started offering a few other things. These companies are buying up smaller companies. They're almost becoming conglomerates, and they're trying to compete on multiple fronts. And there are pros and cons to that, but you need to make sure that if they do offer other things beyond web hosting, are those good services, or are you better off getting it someplace else? So check to see, how do the prices compare versus other vendors. If you're talking about email, for example, I mentioned Cloudways used to have this thing with Rackspace, $1 an email account. Comparing that to Google Workspace for $5 or $6 an email account, well, this would be cheaper then, wouldn't it? But what else can Google Workspace do for you that you may want for that price, also versus just getting an email account here? If you just want an email account, you probably want the lowest price you can get. Google Workspace, Microsoft Office 365, those services offer a lot more than just the email account. But you need to figure out where you're going to host things. And if your web host has an inexpensive way to do it, WPX, for example, again, I used to be with them. They will also offer email hosting, and some of it's included with your web hosting, so it's not even an extra cost. So keep that in mind. What support does the host offer for the add-ons versus its web hosting? So what I'm talking about here is you're paying and getting support with your hosting for web hosting. If you add something else on, you're paying for that. Are you getting separate support or integrated support for both services? How are they taking care of you when you need help with your e-commerce or with your email service or whatever other add-on that they've given you? So typically that's not a problem that there is customer support, but what support do they offer? And again, how does that compare to other competitors that offer the add-on service that you're looking at? Are there any guarantees? So when you get your guarantee for hosting, that doesn't apply to your e-commerce. It doesn't apply to your email. Look for, again, guarantees and make sure they are in writing. They should be in the terms of service before you click. I know a lot of people will say, do you agree to the terms of service? Yeah, check the box without ever having read it. Do yourself a favor. Always read those terms of service, particularly for business. All right. We talked about shared hosting versus a VPS. So shared hosting is the most common for hobbyists and bloggers. The pros are it's lower cost, and they typically have less expensive plans than a VPS plan because you're sharing resources. It's cheap, it's easy. It's also very simple. They're generally easier to set up and manage. You don't have to do as much work yourself. And in some cases, they will do a lot of the work for you, or they have automated systems that will do the work for you. The downside, they have limited resources. So you don't have as much RAM, you don't have as much CPU access, and you probably don't have as much storage. And more than that, you probably don't even know what you have. And that means you can have slower load times or downtime if other websites on the server consume too many resources. And this was a problem I had with WPX. So even though they had the great 30-second support time, there were times I could not get to my website because I didn't have enough resources or something else was taking it up. There were other times that you'll find on the back end of WordPress, and by that I mean the administrative area, when you log in, it was extraordinarily slow because I didn't have the resources to run my website. And even though the front end seemed snappy to visitors because of caching, in other words, they were just getting, pre-made versions of a web page handed out to them. For me to work with it, that doesn't get cached. And the back end, it was just taking forever. And that's why I ultimately left the folks over at WPX because they just didn't have enough resources for what I needed to run on my business. So that is a problem with shared hosting. And also, there may be limited customization options. So what you can do with your server, or if you have custom software that you want to do. A lot of places are managed WordPress sites, and if you're not running WordPress, they're not going to load it on there. Or there may be, as I said before, plugins that they will not accept. Or there may be customizations you want to do. So, for example, if you wanted to have a larger disk scratch space or disk cache, then the answer is probably no. You get what you get. Whereas with Cloudways, they may not do it on the 1 or 2 gig servers, but I've got a 4 gig server, and yeah, they doubled the size of my disk cache, which helped my performance overall. And that was something I could do because it only affected me. I can use my disk space the way I want. With shared hosting, probably not. So a virtual private server, and commonly referred to as a VPS. And this is when you've got more than just a blog with static pages. So the upside, you have more resources, and they're dedicated resources. No one else is going to be consuming your resources, and that gives you better performance, faster load times, both for your front loading stuff for your visitors and on the back end. Since I moved over to this VPS, I have not had any problems with a sluggish administrative area. You have more control, so you can control what the server environment is. I can go in and customize how much of my RAM I associate with PHP. I can associate other factors inside of my VPS controls, so I can kind of tinker and tweak to get better performance if I need it. So WordPress, I think by default, looks at 64 gigs of RAM. Well, mine's set up at 256 gigs of RAM because I've got the space for it. Even though I have multiple websites on the same server, I can allocate those the way I want. Maybe one site needs more RAM than another site does, and I can tweak those things individually for the WordPress applications because the overall server has enough storage to share. Now, there is typically a higher cost, but I'll tell you that a 1 gigabyte server on Cloudways, I was paying $13 a month for a 1 gigabyte VPS server. And they'll warn you, like, this is for low volume sites or for demo sites or maybe a staging site. So it's not necessarily something for a high volume site, but it's still a lot more resources than you would get from shared hosting. So keep that in mind. $13 for that, and maybe they've raised their prices a little bit. I don't know. I haven't looked at the lower end servers lately. WP Engine was charging me $50 a month, and WPX didn't charge that much, but they still charged more than what I was paying at Cloudways for that server. So typically, you're probably going to go to a VPS to get more resources. I was paying $50 a month for the 4 GB of RAM server. I think they recently upped that maybe to $60, but still, for hosting multiple sites on there and all the control I get and not having to worry about shared resources, it costs more, but it's a good business investment. It's smarter that way. So you may pay more money, but look at what you're getting in return. And you have to make a value determination. Is it worth it to you or not? Because are you getting revenue and are you in a business, or are you just a happy blogger and it doesn't matter so much about the performance? You're also going to need a little bit more technical expertise. I'd say Cloudways does a very good job of making things simple for you to do. And also, when I've gone for their support, even though I don't have a paid support plan, which is available, I found they've been very willing to help me if I've got a server that has high CPU usage or um, is not responding. They will come in there and they will address exactly what it is. They've got help desk articles and knowledge base articles that will show you some things that you can do yourself to try and troubleshoot what's going on. So, yeah, you may need to have a little bit more technical expertise, but there's also a paid service if you don't have that technical expertise that they will take care of you, at least with Cloudways. Now, there are other places like Cloudways. One is called Run Cloud. I think another one's called GridPane. I have not used these, but they are essentially VPS services that might work out well for you. So shop around, check and see what works well for you. I see people on forums that praise and condemn all of these different services. I've got no problems with Cloudways. I'm happy to recommend it, and I'll have a link in the description below if you want to check it out. And I'm sure there are people that were displeased with them. There's people who are pleased with them. It just runs the gamut. GridPane and RunCloud I hear about. There's another one called Rocket, which I only recently heard about. So shop around, try and search for some of those names and see which one is probably best for you. But they also do things to make it easy. So if you want to install WordPress, you click a button to install WordPress. You wait a couple of minutes and it's okay, your WordPress is ready. Now you can add a domain to your WordPress site. Just because it requires a bit more technical expertise or there are options to use more technical expertise doesn't mean that they don't make it simple. In fact, the whole purpose of Cloudways is they have multiple hosts, including Google and Amazon Web Services and Linode and VULTR, which I can go direct to VULTR and get the same thing for half the price, but there's no service with it. I got to know everything to do. Cloudways puts a easy to use front end and they offer some customer service to go with it and they integrate with other things, and that's what I'm paying for. So if I could get $5 for a 1 gig server going directly to VULTR, I could pay $10 getting it on Cloudways, but it's worth it to me. There's a value judgment, and that's why I like a virtual private server. So just a little thing here from Neil Patel. When it comes to web hosting, you get what you pay for. Choose a hosting provider that offers the features and support you need, even if it costs a little bit more. So let's go over what we covered. You want to look for reliability and uptime. You want to look for customer service. Do they have off-site backups, and how often and where do they keep them? What are the costs and fees? What does it take to add a domain? Do they only add the domains from their business, or can you transfer one over? Are there account limitations? Can you outgrow your site and then have to upgrade? So what happens if you exceed those limitations? And are there add-ons that perhaps may interest you and make things more convenient for you? And then we talked about shared hosting versus a VPS. So my advice, choose wisely. All right. I hope that was helpful for you. I hope it gives you some ideas. There are plenty of web hosts out there. Some are more expensive than others, and some offer services that exceed the more expensive places. Shop around, ask questions, read carefully on their terms and conditions, and know what you're getting. There are a lot of people who will tell you what is a great web host, and I bought some web hosts based upon their advice and eventually found out that, well, some things were good and some things weren't, and I left. It is much simpler and easier if you can find the best place for you and your business right up front and save yourself the years of hassle that I went through. So those are my tips. I hope it helps you out, and I'll see you again next Thursday.